Let's go!
Been in news for a little while, and I've been meaning to talk about it, but I just have not had an opportunity to do so. We got the pretty sad news that Multiversus is being shut down, and I get it. Like, some people would be like, or try to berate the fact, but it doesn't make me happy that fighting games get shut down, especially when they lose their functionality. And obviously, games as a service, free-to-play games like that is an issue where they are reliant on their online functionality effectively being paid for by people that are buying content monthly. Obviously, a free-to-play game, obviously was first introduced a few years ago, went through a lot of stuff, but it's important to realize kind of what happened, why we're here, what could have happened to a game that had so much financial backing and so much player base. I think we kind of forget where Multiversus was 2021 or 2022. When it was first revealed, they had the first early betas and stuff like that. But yes, it is being closed down and the game is going to be unfunctional. It'll still be playable, but as I understand it, like the online functionality of it will not be working anymore, which is truly sad, which is like, oh man, that really sucks. So there's not going to be any like proper servers that are set up for it and likely will be in the hands of fans. This reminds me a lot of the 2XKO developers, and they did the same thing for their previous game, you know, the robot fighting game, and they just let people have it and just figure it out. So how the hell? I think we need to break down the moment-to-moment situation of why this happened, because we talked about this a few times when Multiversus was coming back, and it was getting new characters, and it was a revamp, a new engine, like all this stuff, and they started going over all the details, and I was saying that there is a problem with free-to-play games and effectively games as a service going into betas where they're trying to get people interested. And that was clearly what Multiversus was at the start. Do you remember the early things we were hearing about the game? Multiversus had like a development team of like 15 to 20 people or something like that. It was a very small project that was kind of like, well, we have all these licenses and franchises, let's do something with them. Got the approval for that shit, and all of a sudden, hey, super tiny dev team put this together. And now it's a beta. Go try it. It's free. There's some DLC you can buy, you know, that kind of stuff to effectively support it. But this was right around a very tumultuous time with Warner Brothers going through a pretty huge shift in corporate structure. So that was all happening when they were making the game, you know? So anyway, it feels like they're just trying to get people on their side, even internally, just to like support the game in some way. Maybe we could get like a real budget on this, because look at this, right? A reminder, like, I don't think Multiversus ever really came out in other territories, like outside of like here in Europe, like Asia and stuff like that. There were some places in the world that just never really got Multiversus, period. And that was an issue with the beta. That was an issue, I think, even in the final release, it might have gotten alleviated at some point. It comes out, and I have screenshots of it in tweets and stuff like that. And that was like kind of a celebration. The game wasn't exactly, you know, what I wanted it to be, because it being a Smash-like is only going to be so interesting, but it was eclipsing numbers we had never seen before in the fighting game space, at least in recorded history. Maybe on the back end, some games were bigger, like Smash and all that kind of shit, but to be real, like, this thing was eclipsing absolutely massive numbers. There was so many people playing this game, it would make your friggin' head spin. It was breaking all records in comparison to, like, other fighting game content, right, or other fighting games, even the biggest fighting games at the time. The amount of folks that were playing Multiversus around its initial launch was ridiculous. And granted, yeah, free-to-play game, that many people even playing a fighting game at one point was ridiculous. And I think it got much bigger than this. I think this number was substantially bigger at certain points of its initial release. So this was just the Steam version, and the Steam version was not the primary focus. It was like a PlayStation game, you know? Like hundreds of thousands, not just on Steam, everything together, hundreds of thousands of people were putting that much time into the game early on. So how the hell does it go from being one of the most and highest recorded fighting games ever to now pretty much being canceled? So there's a couple of things. Number one, let's remind ourselves, back to 2022 to 2023 when the game was eventually taken down, the communication was whack. We were getting new characters and there was new content being released, but it was kind of revealed that this is a beta and we're eventually going to need to take this thing down. That kind of snuck up on the game. There was also a lot of weird monetization stuff and things around it, how you unlock characters, the process behind doing that, how much investment it took, like all that shit. There was clearly things were not worked out. It kind of felt like at an early level, the game wanted to get support from its publisher and from fans in some way. Because I did like directly hear from several people that the costume stuff, some of the skins that they were selling in the game were selling ridiculously well. Like the amount of money that they were getting as an input was super high, but there was a problem. The game was being designed as a games as a service, and you have a small development team that cannot keep up with that content release. As games as a service, you have to constantly have new characters and new skins and new things to buy. We're seeing Marvel Rivals handle that pretty well right now, but this was a small dev team. Within the first few months, running into pretty big problems. The games online got worse, and it seemed to get worse. And it seemed to get worse and worse, where it's like, oh, okay, so maybe if there's less players playing, you actually really start to see things fall apart at the seams. At one point, you know, they were having to take characters away because they were like busted and then bring them back later. The choices behind that were just clearly not set in stone. And they were kind of learning this stuff on the fly, is what it felt like. Clearly, WB steps in and it's like, oh, we got hundreds of thousands of people playing this game. Why are we making more money? You know, we got to start making money. You have to start making things to sell, you know, do that now. So they had to start doing that as like a small development team. And there was plenty of stories coming out that, hey, Multiversus is hiring. They're looking for people. They're looking for people. They need people. We need humans to throw at this like immediately. And that was all within like the first 9 months of the game being out, you know? It was huge. Like it relatively big, had a decent showing at Evo for the most part, although it took way too long. It was clearly not designed to be like an offline fighting game in any way. And then they made the harsh reality, right? The harsh reality caught up to us. It had to be taken down. It was not designed to function, you know, this way. There was no way that they were going to be able to keep up with this amount of content, develop the game in this capacity, and just keep going. We have to like stop and then reevaluate and then redistribute, hire people, and then re-release. So that's exactly what they did. The problem is the communication of that was not clear. And it wasn't clear that you're in a beta phase and we have to take that beta down even though you bought shit. Once again, and I don't even think that that miscommunication was intentional. I think it's mostly that they were sort of figuring that shit out by themselves, right? They were sort of figuring that out with obviously a lot of corporate oversight going, hey, you know, we gotta start making money on this, but it's eventually a beta, we have to take it down. So they got pushed into a corner and they won Fighting Game of the Year and all this shit, even though it was in a beta. That was the craziest part. A game that was in a beta state won Fighting Game of the Year at the Game Awards, a game that was not even fully released. It could have won Fighting Game of the Year again for its release version. It did and made no sense, dude. It would have been giving like Guilty Gear Strive rollback beta Fighting Game of the Year instead of DNF Duel or KOF 15, which was what it was up against. So this isn't the fault of like you or anybody that was playing Multiversus that you were caught off guard with this shit, because even the Game Awards assumed that it was out and it's done. So it's taken down. And a lot of people are big mad that it's taken down. Admittedly so. And it's taken down for a while, quite a long time. And then eventually gets a proper re-release. And that re-release comes with several different functionalities. They're upgrading to Unreal Engine 5, saying that the netcode is going to get better, which we kind of expected after it getting worse in the later portion of the beta. And it's going to have a ton of new characters. So I'll speak from me personally. In that time frame, I had to warn people when Multiversus went away, because it was already had a little negative funk around it. Like this, there wasn't substantially like great news if you were talking about Multiversus in that time frame when it was going down the first time. I had to warn people, and I've been aware of this, and I've been involved with developers and have had conversations with devs that have been put into this situation where, yeah, when you have a game that sort of hits, but it's kind of like a service game that's going to be free for everybody and online, you're looking for money. You're looking for a publisher to go like, hey, you got something that's really good. We can actually give you more money to make this better. But in several situations, and I'm sure you guys have played a game like this that just shows up out of nowhere. Here's a beta. You can play it for a while, and they eventually have to like take it down. Not unique to Multiversus. This is a problem where they now have the budget to allocate. They allocate the budget, they get the people, and guess what? They do not have the same pull they had from when it first came out. They're unable to captivate an audience in the same way when they return with their full release. We've all seen that happen to several different games, not like fighting games exclusive. This is to like everything, shooters or whatnot. That entire thing of just like, this is such a cool game. There's so many people playing it, and then it goes away, and then you expect people to be super interested later. It just doesn't really happen. There has to be substantial changes or really big things that go down with the game or that come back with the game and that are new that get people super invested in shit, right? Because the hype dies down, especially if the game leaves in like a sour state. Multiversus had a pretty sour separation when it came to the first time it went down. So I was warning people of that, where it's like, well, this game is gonna have to captivate an audience all over again. So it's really got to be different. Much better net play. It's going to have. We were expecting characters to have supers. We were expecting a full-ass story mode. Remember all these things we were talking about? We're like, if they need to hit these things, you need to give people a ton of single-player content. It can't just be playing online. There has to be a shit ton of stuff to the game by the time they release it. Speaking for me personally. It gets re-released, and there's a couple of new characters, but it's the same goddamn game. And it's almost like bewildering. Wait, so what actually changed? Like all the menus and the music and most of the stages and things are just the same? And then the biggest negative of it all, it wasn't the same game. It looked like the same game, but it just ran at like half the speed. So something happened in the background from a design document's perspective where they chose just to tone the game down its entire speed, the way everything works, by like half. And maybe that was a netcode decision. Maybe that was because the netcode was falling apart with less people to match with if it was moving that fast. Sure, I could see it. So they have to make the game have more frames to buffer with, yeah, sure, that could be the case. But them switching the engine, which obviously could not have been cheap, that had some single player content, but not like, it wasn't amazing. It was just sort of there. And all of that stuff they said they did, from anybody that was like played the beta like a year or something ago, a year and a half before, you see it come back and it's just the same shit, but we got Jason and Agent Smith, I think is what it was at the very beginning. So it's just like 2 new characters. That's it. And it really felt like we didn't take a huge leap over the last version of the game. There wasn't like this absolutely massive, oh, the game's actually out now, here's the real game. No. It just went away for a long time and came back with a couple of characters. And it got slower. Well, that's weird. I cannot speak for everybody else. The Joker, thank you. The Joker was also in. I think Mr. Smith came like a little bit later. Banana Guard was also there. The marketing around it was also super weird too, because it sort of just showed up out of nowhere and it was like, hey, it's pretty much like ready to go in a week or 2. And everything that you saw of it was like, looks slower, but kind of looks the same. They showed some side-by-side shit, but it didn't really particularly look incredible. And then you learn on the back end that possibly could have cost them like $100 million. They got like over $100 million to develop this stuff. But then you start to maybe realize, considering the WB-ness of this entire situation, maybe, just maybe, they spent all of that money, or a very, very large majority of that money, on things that would eventually release over time, not right at launch, but over time that would sell. You have to create a game and a model of distribution and release of content that is going to sell. People will not be big mad when their one character they're playing has a costume that might cost anywhere between $10 to $20. Marvel Rivals is like the best example of that. People will be willing to spend that money on a game that they're just really enjoying playing, As much as I don't agree with it, and probably would not be doing that, if you have something you love, you will justify that purchase. But it seemed, at least to me, because I didn't engage with that much, everybody complained about the normal player aspect, where if you don't pay, how you unlock characters, how long it takes to get that shit. It was not generous. This was not something that was easy to do. It took like 10, 20, 30 hours just to unlock like one character. Everything was so insanely grindy that within a few months of the game being out, they had to acknowledge it and I think changed it a bit, where it got even a bit easier, and it's still super grindy. I've seen a lot of people come to me and be like, look at this game failing. Look at it, it's now getting canceled. It's getting canceled because it was a free-to-play game. And I'm like, wait. No. I've always been kind of in the defense force that we need a free-to-play fighting game, but it can't suck. Right? We need a free-to-play fighting game that doesn't have absolutely trash unlocking methods for unlocking its characters and roster. We need something that has like fair battle passes. We need something that has fair skin costumes. We need something that will treat the player fairly and also give you incentive to do that stuff, because its core gameplay loop is worth it. It's just fun. That's the whole point of good free-to-play games. I'm not asking for things that are bad, but there's clearly, at least in the space of like some of the biggest free-to-play games that are out there, like Fortnite, outside of the obvious, the battle pass is going away, some of their stuff is pretty generously priced. It's not insanely expensive. And it's clear that in other games, free-to-play can work. What I'm trying to say is that free-to-play was all this thing had going for it. The reason it was getting hundreds of thousands, potentially 300 to 500,000 people playing it in that first week was because it was a free-to-play game. All the attention, if Multiversus came out and it was a $50 game, a $60 game, a $70 game. And it had just all the characters, but minimal content and online and buying skins and effectively launching like a Mortal Kombat 1, right? If it came out even at a lower premium, a $40 or a $50 game, dude, this shit would not have taken off. It would have been better than those like Nicktoons games a little bit, but it would have been like comparable. What did it was that it was free, is that anybody can try it, and now you can 2v2 with your friends and jump online and give it a shot, you know? And a lot of those people ended up buying costumes and shit. They made the majority of their money and got all of this like notoriety in those early first year from being a free-to-play game that is like finally like a fighting game's doing it. It was obvious that in the details, oh, this shit kind of sucks. Actually, woof, dude. Because you get anything from WB and there's going to be some asterisks at the end of anything they're offering from a free-to-play experience, anything they're offering from a full-price game. Like, we just know the WB-ness kicks in nowadays. So ultimately speaking, we've heard a lot of things over the past week, that the internal development was very weird, that it wasn't the easiest game to develop for, not just from the corporate aspect of it. So it seems like a lot of it just came to a head where likely the developers, the directors, the producers were getting a lot of pressure for this to be a thing that slaps. And a lot of bad decision-making was probably happening. I think it's a bummer, is all I'm going to say, because we had a game that was kind of proving the fact that we could have a fighting game that is like free to play, you know? We can have something that works and we can pull people in. Like Virtua Fighter was a decent example of it, and we're getting a new Virtua Fighter as a result, but are we going to get a free to play Virtua Fighter? I don't know, man. All I'm saying is that I think this is, in my opinion, still the defense that fighting games can be free to play, but you can't just fuck people over. You can't just be so blatant with like $20 to $30 costumes like all over the place and ridiculously hard to unlock battle passes. And if the player that is playing the game is not engaging with that stuff and just playing it for free, their experience is ass, dude. That's not going to work anywhere. You're not like Call of Duty. And even some of the big games, like I said, Fortnite, don't do that shit, man. They don't like absolutely like super nickel and dime the shit out of you. Their battle passes and that shit are mostly pretty generous. If anything, I think it teaches a lesson that this can work, but you can't launch like a game in a free-to-play state and not be ready to update the shit out of it. We've seen other games like recently launched. Marvel Rivals is a great example, a game that has like a lot of costumes and content and shit that's just sort of like happening fairly quickly, and obviously is an expensive, gorgeous looking game, but has an interesting gameplay loop with characters people love. So it's free and bam, slaps. Everybody's super into it, you know? There needs to be huge and decipherable roadmaps, because it never really felt like Multiversus was designed to be a free-to-play game. It was always an idea. We'll release it for free. We'll get people into it. Oh shit, people are into it. Well, what do we do now? Oh God, and can't meet that demand. And it took too long to meet that demand, and it was just over. Obviously concerned with things like 2XKO in the near future, because that's the only direct free-to-play fighting game on the horizon that doesn't have like a premium, you know, where obviously games like Killer Instinct and Grand Blue Fantasy Versus and DOA 5 and stuff like that have wonderful free-to-play engaging modes that just let you get into it. But do they fully commit to the free-to-play model like some of these do? They don't, man. They don't. And we've even said that, dude, some games really needed to be free to play. Like DNF Duel was a game that absolutely needed to condition its player base to be free to play. Like, and it felt like a game that was sort of designed around that shit. So at least to me personally, I hope 2XKO obviously has a plan of this, and clearly they're coming from developers that have a huge publishing history of figuring that shit out. So they're gonna have plenty of ways to engage their audience, and I don't expect 2XKO to just nickel and dime and rip you off, you know, for everything. I don't expect it to do that. It's just astonishing that a fighting game could come out in the past several years and go from being one of the most played game of the year, highest recorded humans playing a single fighting game in a single place in recorded history to 2.5, 3 years later now being shut down. And it's a tale as old as time when it comes to these games that effectively release and they try to get a backing, make an emergence, and reevaluate themselves and a rebirth. Hey, the game's back, but it isn't in a state that feels like it is gone through enough substantial changes. And I think that's what happened to Multiversus. I think its relaunch didn't feel big enough. It didn't feel like what they were offering was going to change that experience so much that I had to go back and play it. I had to come back and check this out. I had to see if that was different. Everything that was different about it felt worse when it comes to my personal take. The fact that, hey, this speedy little Smash-like is pretty fun. I can't wait till it gets supers, you know, and they polish out some of the, you know, some of like the visual stuff and they really get it going. No, dude, it was like the same shit, but slower. It was just a less fun game.